Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and this is my review of episode 3 of season 3 of Star Trek Discovery called The People of Earth. And I actually thought the first half of this episode was actually good. We finally get to see some character interactions who felt natural and believable and emotional. And I also think this show is trying hard to reinvent the character of Michael into a much more likable character. So suddenly she's smiling, suddenly she's emotional. They even changed her hair, even though I think her hair is kind of too long. They said she was only waiting for 1 year, and yet her hair is so long as if she was waiting a few years. But with the medical tech that they should have in this time period, I guess she could have accelerated it. And the only thing that bugged me about her hair is, they show that fight scene that she has in the holodeck. Her long hair is flipping all over the place, and I keep thinking, that is kind of a big weakness in fights. When your enemy will be able to grab your long hair and to pull you, that's a huge disadvantage. And so if you care so much about being a good fighter, maybe you should have kept the short hair. So that's the only thing that bugged me about her hair. And that whole scene was also kind of ridiculous when she's training how to fight in the holodeck. At least now the holodeck being solid, you being able to touch things, it finally makes sense, because if they showed that in the previous seasons, I would have pulled a riot about that if they had solid holograms already. So at least technically that part makes sense in this season because they're now in the future. But the way that whole scene was done was also kind of ridiculous. First of all, they again show clouds in space, lightning storms in space all around the ship, and this is something that always bugged me about the show, that they always do that. They always have to, I guess, to make it less boring, so they want to show interesting things in space, and that will be okay. But they can't show a nebula far out in the distance or something like that. Instead, they always show as if space is made of clouds with lightning storms and shooting stars and all that kind of stuff that you shouldn't really be able to see out in space. So that always bugged me. And even when they show her fighting, it has like fog or smoke in the distance for absolutely no reason except to look artistic, I guess. And the way that whole fight was choreographed also looked kind of ridiculous. So that guy is charging at her with his hands to the sides or behind him as if he wants to get punched, and then she punches him and she sends him flying up into the air in a very unrealistic way. So I thought that looked ridiculous. I guess maybe because he's a hologram, maybe he has less mass, maybe she set it on easy and that's what we see, but it kind of looks ridiculous anyway. So they actually had some decent human interactions when Michael meets up with the Discovery crew. It was actually finally done well. They feel like actual people, and it feels as if those scenes were earned. It's not just coming out of nowhere in an artificial way, it's all kind of been set up. So it was actually well done, and as I said, Michael seems to be much more friendly now, much more emotional, much more human than she was previously. The only part I didn't like when she basically crowned Saru as the captain, and everybody, including him, seemed to think that she's the one who has to make that decision. So she kind of allows him to become captain as if she has the authority to say otherwise, and so I didn't get that part, and I found that annoying. It's again kind of smug, because the show seems to be saying, of course, she has to be the captain because she's the bestest ever, and even Saru acknowledges that, and yet because she's so generous, because she's so kind, she allows him to stay the captain. And so that whole part kind of rubbed me the wrong way, and it doesn't make sense. That's my biggest problem with the show, that so many things could have been okay or acceptable if it simply made sense in the context of it, and yet so many things don't make sense if you think about the details. And Saru was the first officer even of Lorca and later of Pike, and he was in command of the Discovery, and so why the hell should Michael be the captain suddenly? So why is he so willing to give up his command to her? Was kind of annoying, but at least the show did the right thing by keeping him as the captain, because I do think he fits that role much better, and it's also about time to finally see an alien captain and not just human captains all the time. So I think the show did the right decision. I simply think it should have been done. They shouldn't have made such a big deal of it because Michael came back, that suddenly everybody worships her so much that of course she should be the captain, but at least she didn't become one. Another thing that pissed me off is the continuity mistake with the synthahol. We see Book trying to drink on the Discovery, and then Michael comes in and tells him that he's not going to get drunk off of it because it's synthahol, and that almost made me punch my view screen, because this ship is from the 23rd century. It predates the ships we saw in TOS, and in all of TOS, including the TOS movies, synthahol did not yet exist. We know this because when Scotty got to the TNG era, he was surprised to hear about synthahol, and Data even said he wouldn't have known about it because only now it's been served on ships, and so that seems to indicate pretty strongly that it simply did not exist previously. And this ship is from even before TOS, and yet this ship does have synthahol already. That makes no sense, and it pisses me off because it again shows that the writers of the show do not know all the details, and that's why they keep messing things up. And even though they're now in the future, the ship is still from the past, and so that's why it's still a continuity mistake. And they didn't have any scene showing them updating their computers and all of that, and so you cannot use that as an excuse. It was all before they arrived to Earth, and so they didn't yet have any such opportunity. The only way to possibly explain away this mistake is by saying that maybe Michael does know about it because she read up on all the history, and maybe she's simply lying to Book to mess with him, and so she tells him it's synthahol, even though it shouldn't really exist on the ship yet, and so she basically lies to him. That's the only way to explain it away. And it's still kind of annoying, because the only way to explain away mistakes in the show is by saying that characters simply lie about everything all the time. You know, just like what I was making fun of Spock in the show by saying that the only way it will fit with the continuity of TOS is if he was a giant liar during TOS. That he kept saying, you know, such speeds are impossible, and there was no mutiny in Starfleet history, and so the only way to fit it all together in one continuity is by saying that Spock was a huge liar during TOS, and so that kind of ruins the character of Spock, and so that's really a lame way to try to explain away continuity mistakes by the writers, and so that was the first moment that really annoyed me in this whole episode. But of course the most annoying part was when they actually got to Earth. I think the show basically put the final nail in the whole idea of Star Trek. And even before that, there was something technical that annoyed me when they jumped to Earth, and at least finally they had the sense to jump not right into orbit, but to some distance to figure out what's going on first before suddenly, by surprise, arriving at Earth, not knowing what's there. And so finally they decided to keep their distance first and to scan the area and only then to approach it. And that's something I was poking fun at the show all the time, because how many scenes we saw of them warping into some place without being able to scan it somehow, and only dropping out of warp in the last possible second, and then colliding with a huge amount of stuff on the other end. So that always was so stupid in the show, and also in the 2009 movie. So at least they didn't do that here. At least they didn't suddenly drop right into Earth's orbit by surprise, and instead they jumped to near Saturn and then approached Earth more slowly, or so they said. And yet that scene was also kind of stupid in the way it was edited, because they didn't leave any room for any kind of passage of time in between. They appeared next to Saturn and arrived at Earth. It apparently took only 5 seconds, which makes absolutely no sense, because even in the closest possible orbits, it should still take around an hour to get from Saturn to Earth, even at light speed. And so they're not going at warp because they're pretending that they don't have warp capability, and they don't want to tell them about the spore drive for some reason. And so they're pretending as if they arrived at sublight speeds, and yet they got from Saturn to Earth in what seemed like 5 seconds. If the scene was simply edited differently to suggest that there might have been some time in between, then I'd be totally okay with that. I also enjoy fast pacing. I don't want obviously to see them going that distance during the whole episode. That's not what I want to see. I simply want the editing to suggest that some time passed. They don't even have to go into the details. Simply show it in a way that we can imagine to ourselves that next amount of time passed. And yet the way they set up the scene seemed to be designed to do the opposite. So we see Book literally saying, oh, the ship spins when you go to the spore jump and all of that. So it indicates that they just came out. And then in the same scene, they already see Earth in the view screen and they arrive at it right away. So that makes absolutely no sense, and it reminds me of something. I made a whole video about this topic in season 1, when they also showed the ship moving across the whole solar system in what seemed like seconds. And in some shots of this show, they even show all the planets in one line on the same screen, as if you can see all the planets together on the same screen, as if the distance between them is so short. And so that always drives me nuts, and all the shows did that to some extent, but in this show it's like they don't care at all about astronomy, they don't care at all to be accurate scientifically, and that really pisses me off. And so this scene is just another example of that. But the worst part in this episode was what they did with Earth itself. Well, I guess at least they didn't blow it up, which I kind of half expected, that they will arrive and find out that Earth was destroyed. So at least they didn't do that, but they did the second worst thing to that. They basically reveal that Earth is now isolationist, and it's now xenophobic planet which doesn't want to deal with anyone else, including planets in the same solar system, including the fellow humans in the same system, which makes absolutely no sense at all any way you think about it. And also they had that stupid twist that some aliens were attacking Earth, which at first was plausible, like I would be willing to accept that, but then they revealed they're actually humans from Titan, the moon of Saturn, and for some reason they decided to dress up as aliens and pretend to be aliens, and Earth really thinks they're aliens and don't know their fellow humans, and so that makes absolutely no sense. Like, why would any one of them do that? Why would the humans from Titan pretend to be aliens, and why would Earth not try to find out who those aliens are? And so none of this makes any kind of sense. And the idea of Earth abandoning its own solar system, in which you can get to it without warp travel, you can get to all the planets, and you can also have communication even by normal radio today between these planets. And so how come no one from Titan ever managed to contact anyone from Earth? Like, let's say there is a conspiracy by the authorities on Earth that they don't want the people to know that the ones attacking them are humans. Okay, maybe I can buy that, but how come you cannot bypass that and you cannot simply contact the people on the planet itself? Even with normal radio, let's say subspace radio doesn't work, just by normal radio you could do that. And so how come no one knows that those people are humans? And so how come they couldn't simply let them know? They said they attacked their ship when they arrived, and then they simply stopped trying. Like, why not send radio signals? And so none of it makes any kind of sense if you think about it. Also, how did Giorgio even know that that guy is human? It was never explained. She just guessed it, I guess. And so then the Discovery crew and Saru has to basically force the two sides to talk with each other and settle their differences. So you're going to tell me that for at least a century they didn't think of doing that? Like, no one else ever thought of that? They needed Saru and they needed the Starfleet ship to do that? Like, this is so absurd, it makes no sense. Like, it has a little glimpse of the idea of Star Trek of solving problems by negotiation and all of that, so it did have like a small seed of something that I could have liked if it was done well in the details, but the details don't make any sense in the context of it, and that's why it pisses me off. And the biggest insult in the whole episode is the fact that they turn humanity itself, the center of humanity, Earth itself, is now a xenophobic planet which doesn't care about anyone else, and they say that it's no longer the place of Starfleet, they don't want Starfleet there, they're not part of the Federation anymore, and don't want to be. And so that was such a huge insult to the whole vision of Star Trek, humanity being enlightened, growing up, becoming peaceful, and wanting to make peace with other aliens and wanting to explore the galaxy, being curious about the galaxy. It's now totally the opposite in every way. So it's now worse than today. The planet now, almost the villains. Like, they didn't go all the way with it. They didn't make Earth the villains completely because, they're still open to the possibilities. And so maybe now there will be some change. And so, if by the end of the season they will show that change, they will show humanity getting back on track, maybe I could forgive this, but I don't think they're going to do that. And that's something that always bugged me about the show from the start, that the writers of the show never liked the idea of an enlightened humanity, and that's why even in season 1 they made everything look dystopian. They made Starfleet itself look kind of too militaristic and dark and cruel, and no one caring about animal rights and all of that. No one except Michael, of course, because she's the bestest ever and the most perfect human ever. But everybody else were the complete opposite, so it seemed to be as if I'm watching a show about the Cardassians, of the Cardassian Union, and not one about the enlightened human from Starfleet. And so that's something that bugged me from the start, and so now they finally did it completely. Now they finally do whatever they want to do, because they're now, quote, free from continuity, so now they're basically dismissing all the ideas of Star Trek completely. So now humanity is not evolved, humanity is not enlightened, humanity is now xenophobic and not even caring about their own fellow humans in the same system, and not caring about exploring the galaxy. And I just found this whole idea kind of offensive. I found it all despicable and just the complete opposite of what Star Trek always was and supposed to be. And maybe I would have been okay with that if it was done well and if it served some kind of purpose, if it was done for the sake of an interesting story, but we know it's not going to be the case. Basically, they wanted to dismiss Earth because they didn't want to make it too easy, I guess. They didn't want Discovery to get help from anyone, and so that's why they had to kind of move Earth out of the way, and that's why they did it, I guess. So maybe I can forgive it, for the sake of this season, the story they want to tell. They had to do it, and so that's why they did it, but still it felt kind of nasty. They could have found better way to deal with this. They could have simply said that Earth is inaccessible. Simply, they could have used the excuse that I offered, that subspace is damaged and you cannot get to certain areas of the galaxy, and simply say that Earth is cut off and they cannot get to it, and so that would have been a much easier way to do it without offending the very core ideas of Star Trek. So basically they said that Earth became xenophobic and they built a giant force field around it. to keep anyone out, and they're attacking anyone who approaches them. They don't want any communication with anyone else, and so that's kind of too nasty in my opinion and makes no sense logically. But at least they didn't turn them into total straight up villains. At least in the end they did show kind of an optimistic, hopeful ending that, you know, maybe these humans can still solve all these problems, and, you know, they help them reestablish peaceful coexistence with the colony on Titan. And I kept wondering, where are all the other colonies? Shouldn't by this time period all the planets should be inhabited? Like, what happened to the moon? Where are the moon colonies? What happened to them? Are they also part of Earth, or are they also disconnected? Like, they never explained any of it. I don't think the writers even know. Maybe that's why we didn't even see the moon in this episode, unlike usually in the show they always show the moon really close by, kind of too much. But now we don't even see the moon anywhere. Maybe it blew up, I don't know, but it's kind of funny that basically it's now only Earth and Titan and no one else in the whole solar system, which makes no sense. And so basically Earth became xenophobic and they built a giant space wall all around itself, and it's making Titan pay for it. So I guess that was the message. They wanted to kind of poke fun at the whole isolationist idea, and they wanted to demonize it, and so they went to extreme and they said that, you know, Earth is no longer allowing immigration even to its fellow humans, and all those poor humans stuck on Titan, they're now paying the price, and it's so unempathic, it's so evil and all of that. So I think it's kind of obvious the show is trying to push all these messages, which again, I always say I'm not necessarily against the messages. I'm only pissed off when it's done in a stupid way, and that's what they did. It simply doesn't make sense with what we know previously in this established franchise. It simply doesn't fit together. It's like from something else, in some other science fiction movie or show. It simply doesn't make sense in the context, and it feels forced and artificial and kind of stupid. But at least in the ending they did leave the door open for a hopeful future. They did allow the Starfleet officers from Discovery to visit the planet, to visit Earth, and strangely somehow everything looks exactly as it looked like in Discovery and Picard. When they go to San Francisco, it looks like the same exact place. Like, they didn't want to create new special effects, I guess, and so we see the exact same places, and we see the Golden Gate Bridge still has those solar panels on it. And I won't repeat why I find that whole idea so stupid. I made a whole video about that in the past. I'm not going to repeat it. I will link it in the end, maybe, the video in which I talked about how stupid that whole idea is in a future in which they have fusion reactions and antimatter and all of that. You know, even without the lithium crystals, they would have infinite energy in this time period, so it makes no sense to use solar energy on a bridge from all places, blocking it from being used for what it could have been used for, like people walking and running and jogging and riding there. No, it's just a solar power plant in the 32nd century. So it's so ridiculous beyond the words, in my opinion. And they show Tilly hugging a giant tree, which is a tree that they all studied under in Starfleet Academy. And I kept thinking, how did that tree survive the Breen attack in Deep Space Nine if it's all in the same timeline? So that's kind of a very lucky tree, I guess. And of course the whole place looked nothing like we saw in the old Star Trek shows. It only looks like the one we saw in Discovery and Picard, which is all like its own timeline now. That's how I will explain it to myself. That's the only way for me to not get pissed off so much, is by saying that this is all a whole different timeline, maybe that started since Enterprise because of the temporal Cold War and all of that. So it's simply not in the same continuity. That's the only way I can possibly tolerate this any longer, because it doesn't fit anything in the other Star Trek shows. The whole idea with the dilithium crystals, which they still didn't explain, I don't know how they'll explain it. It makes no sense, and they changed how it looks. Suddenly the crystals are all red and they're glowing, and it looks nothing like the ones we saw previously. Also, this whole setup makes Saru look extremely stupid, because remember in the previous season they said that he spent so much time and effort to memorize 90 Federation languages, and then it turned out that all the languages that he knew were all Earth languages, because I think the writers didn't know the difference between the Federation and Earth. They thought the Federation is only the United Earth. Otherwise it makes no sense how come Saru didn't learn the languages of other planets, only Earth languages. And now it all seems even stupider, because now Earth is not even a member of the Federation anymore, and so all that effort he put in to study 19 Earth languages is totally useless now. Another thing I hated is that Michael once again betrays her captain. She doesn't tell Saru of what she's planning to do, she just decides to do it by herself without consulting him, and there is no logical reason for that, meaning she could have simply told him the plan, and if it's a good plan he would have agreed, and yet she just took matters into her own hands again. So why should he ever trust her again? And so she just makes the same mistake she always did, and so she never learned her lesson, so she's still a mutineer basically. So that's something which I could have been fine with if it made sense in the plot, if it was really necessary, kind of a necessary evil in the situation, and yet it makes no sense. Like, why not tell him? Is it because she thought he would not agree with that plan or what? So she just takes matters into her own hands after she herself grounded him as the captain, and yet then she disregards his orders and just does things behind his back anyway. So that was stupid, and maybe the stupidest part was how stupid the villain was, because he wants their dilithium, and then Michael says, yeah, we'll just give it to you, we'll just give you all our dilithium, just lower your shields please, and then we'll beam it over. And then he does, and then they beam him over, they kidnap him, because he was so stupid to just believe that. And so that's simply stupid beyond words. And so many things piss me off about this episode. And we also have a new character who is a Trill symbiote inside of a human host, which we didn't know at first. She shows up on the ship, and they say she's a 16-year-old kid, and yet she knows everything about everything. And so that immediately kind of annoyed me, because I kept thinking, oh, this is another Michael Burnham, maybe even worse than that. And also it reminds me of that princess, that alien princess from Zahia, who also was like a genius without ever studying and all of that. So that's an idea that always is kind of annoying. And so, you know, that Queen of Zahia, who was all animalistic until Tilly suddenly gave her ice cream, and then she stopped being animalistic and then invented something that the whole Federation with its millions of scientists was not able to invent. She alone, even though she's a princess and only 16, she invented something that the rest of the Federation couldn't. And so that whole idea was so ridiculous, and of course in the end she helped to save the galaxy somehow, using her vast knowledge, even though she didn't know how to make ice cream. And so that whole thing was so annoying, and so I kept thinking, oh no, they're doing the same thing again. So I started to facepalm, but then at least they revealed that she's actually a Trill symbiote, which explains how she has so much knowledge. And so I always say, if there is a logical explanation, then I can be okay with almost anything. And also they want to push the whole non-binary thing with this character, and at least it's done in a way that fits with something from the old Star Trek shows, the whole idea of the symbionts who keep changing hosts, and so the gender keeps changing, and so such a person will be basically non-binary. He will not care if he's male or female anymore, I guess, and so at least it will kind of fit with this idea of the Trill. And the next episode we're going to see the Trill planet, I guess, and I keep sensing they're going to do a Dax cameo at some point, so I don't know what I feel about that. And they did do one thing correctly in this episode when they mentioned that they didn't know the Trill had symbionts, but they did know about the Trill, and so that seems to fit with the fact that we did see Trill characters in the show before, and also in one of the short tracks we saw a Trill woman in Starfleet, and yet Picard was surprised to learn that they have symbionts, and so at least they kind of didn't mess it up continuity-wise with that. And Michael said she met some Trill before in conferences. I think that might have been a reference to something said by Jadzia in Deep Space Nine, that she once visited Earth during the time of TOS. So I guess we'll wait and see what they'll do with it in the next episode. And so this new character is basically someone who is actually ancient and someone who is a member of the old Starfleet. And that at least explains why she's so smart, how she knows so much at such a young age. And as for her being a human and carrying a symbiote, I don't actually have a problem with that, because we once saw Riker carry a Trill symbiote and it did cause him some health problems, but presumably by this time, by this century, medical technology improved so much that they can find a way to deal with that so it doesn't get rejected, and so that's why I didn't really have a problem with that part. And I guess we'll wait and see where they go with it. So that's all I want to say about it for today. Let me know what you think, and we can discuss it in the comment section below, and I'll see you all next time. Bye bye.